Welcome to Video Pods. Are you ready? Let's buckle up and dive in.
All right, let's dive into sustainable coastal tourism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and not just any tourism. We're really focusing in on the kind that keeps those beautiful, beach towns and coastal communities thriving, but without harming the very environment that makes them so special. Our source today is all about destination management in the coastal tourism sector.
Yeah, and it's a really big deal. The source actually points out that coastal and marine tourism makes up at least 50% of global tourism.
Whoa.
Think about it. That's
so
half of all tourists worldwide. They're headed to the coast.
that's huge. That is a massive global industry.
It is.
And balancing that with, the health of our oceans and coastlines. That's what we're trying to figure out.
Exactly.
So by the end of this deep dive,
No.
hopefully we'll all have a better understanding of how to actually make that happen.
Yeah. So this source kind of starts by defining coastal tourism. And it's really broad. Think about the last time you went on vacation to a beach town.
Everything from building sandcastles on the beach to having some amazing fresh seafood at a local restaurant.
Right.
That's all part of coastal tourism.
And don't forget about the activities on the water, like snorkeling, sailing, even going on whale watching tours. Those all fall under that maritime side of coastal tourism.
Yeah, definitely.
The source has this thought experiment, which I think is interesting. It says, imagine you are the destination manager for a really popular coastal area, and you're responsible for not only keeping the place thriving, but also making sure it stays sustainable.
Yeah, it's a tough job. It's like walking a tightrope.
It really is. You've got all these competing interests. You've got the businesses that rely on those tourism dollars. You've got the local communities who call this place home. And then, of course, you have the environment itself.
Yeah, and that leads right into the first big issue that the document brings up.
Yeah.
Pollution. Imagine a pristine beach covered in plastic bottles and cigarette butts.
Yeah, not exactly paradise.
Not really the escape you're looking for. With more tourists, often comes more trash, more sewage, and more stress on the local ecosystems.
And this brainstorming activity in the source really made me think, how do you handle the waste that's generated by these increasing numbers of tourists and still keep those beaches pristine? And it's not even just about the aesthetics. The pollution harms marine life, it impacts water quality, and ultimately it's threatening the very resources that are drawing tourists in the first place.
It's a complex problem.
Yeah.
And it requires a complex solution. Investing in better waste management systems is crucial.
So things like efficient recycling programs and making sure that there are actually enough trash cans available.
Yeah.
Especially in those high traffic areas.
Definitely. And I think it's not just about picking up the trash after it's already been discarded. But the source also highlights educating tourists about responsible disposal, maybe even encouraging them to reduce waste in the first place. So think about all the tiny little shampoo bottles that hotels give you. Maybe we don't need those. So it's about shifting the mindset from cleaning up the mess to actually preventing it in the first place.
Right.
And that requires, a collaboration between the tourists, the businesses, and the local authorities.
Okay, so pollution, that's a major challenge. But the source also brings up the impact of tourism on local cultures.
Yeah, that's another one. Tourists are attracted to a destination because of its unique culture, traditions, way of life. But that influx of visitors can actually erode those very things that make the place so special.
Right, so it's this delicate balancing act. You want to share the beauty of a culture with the world, but you also want to protect it from becoming overwhelmed or exploited.
And it goes beyond just preserving historical sites or traditional crafts. It's also about respecting local customs and making sure that tourism benefits the local communities economically and avoiding what's called cultural commodification, where traditions basically become spectacles for tourists.
Right. Okay, so we've got pollution, we've got cultural sensitivity, and then there's the big one, climate change. Coastal areas are so incredibly vulnerable to rising sea levels, stronger storms, and all those other climate change impacts.
It's a huge concern. And it adds just another layer of complexity to managing these coastal destinations sustainably. Imagine a beautiful beachfront hotel that's suddenly threatened by, coastal erosion or a popular boardwalk destroyed by a powerful storm Not only does this disrupt the tourism industry, but it also puts, lives and livelihoods at risk.
So how do we prepare for something as unpredictable as climate change? This source really underscores proactive planning.
Right.
We're talking about investing in climate-resilient infrastructure.
Yeah, things like
Yeah.
building codes that require new construction to be able to withstand stronger winds, higher tides, designing coastal developments with sea level rise in mind. And then there are also nature-based solutions. Like what? Things like restoring coastal wetlands and mangrove forests. These natural barriers act as buffers against storms and erosion. Plus, they provide a whole host of other ecological benefits. They act as nurseries for fish, they filter pollutants, and they even help capture carbon from the atmosphere.
So it's a win-win for the environment and for coastal communities.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got these three big challenges. We've got pollution, we've got respecting local cultures, and we've got climate change. What does the source suggest we actually do about them?
Well, that's where the Ocean Panel comes in. This international group is really pushing for sustainable ocean management, and they've set a pretty ambitious goal. By 2030, they want to see coastal and marine tourism become completely sustainable and resilient, benefiting local communities and protecting the environment.
Wow, 2030, that seems incredibly ambitious. What are the biggest hurdles to actually achieving that vision?
I mean, there are definitely some major challenges. We're talking about transforming a massive global industry that's often driven by short-term profits and convenience.
Right, like think about all those all-inclusive results that generate tons of waste, or cruise ships that just dump their sewage directly into the ocean.
Exactly. Changing those practices and shifting to a more sustainable model requires a fundamental shift in thinking and a commitment to long-term solutions. It's not going to be easy, but the Ocean Panel believes it's absolutely necessary if we want to preserve the beauty and the vitality of our coasts for future generations.
So how do we make this happen? What are the concrete steps that we can take to move towards a more sustainable model of coastal tourism?
Well, the source lays out a roadmap of actions. It talks about investing in sustainable tourism practices, like eco-friendly accommodations, and tour operators who minimize their environmental impact. It also emphasizes implementing smart management strategies, like limiting the number of visitors to sensitive areas and putting regulations in place to protect natural resources. But it goes beyond just rules and regulations. It's also about incentivizing positive change.
So things like rewarding businesses that use renewable energy, or giving tax breaks to hotels that implement water conservation measures.
Exactly. It's about creating a system where sustainability is not just the right thing to do, but also the economically beneficial thing to do.
And it's not just about protecting the environment. The source also talks about reinvesting tourism revenue back into the local community.
Yes, that's crucial. It's about making sure that the economic benefits of tourism are shared equitably, supporting local businesses, creating jobs, and empowering communities to have a say in how tourism is developed in their area, shifting away from this model where large corporations swoop in, extract the profits, and leave very little behind for the local people.
Yeah, the source also stresses the need to incentivize eco-friendly infrastructure. So things like rewarding businesses that use renewable energy, or building codes that require new construction to be energy efficient and sustainable.
Yeah, shifting the whole system towards sustainability, making it easier and more beneficial for everyone involved in the industry to make environmentally responsible choices.
Now, this was fascinating to me, that the source actually brought up the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, it was a devastating time for the tourism industry worldwide. But the source points out that it also provided a sort of wake-up call.
Yeah, it really exposed the vulnerability of unsustainable tourism practices. When travel restrictions hit, so many coastal communities that relied heavily on mass tourism were left struggling. It really highlighted the need to diversify tourism offerings and build more resilient and locally focused models.
It's like the pandemic hit the pause button on the tourism industry and gave us a chance to step back and reassess.
Yeah, and the Ocean Panel saw this as an opportunity to push for a reset, a chance to rebuild the industry in a more sustainable and equitable way. They even released a special report back in 2022, outlining a whole bunch of opportunities and recommendations for transforming the sector.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the challenges facing coastal destinations, the goals for a more sustainable future, but there's one piece of the puzzle that we haven't really touched on yet, and that's the role of the traveler.
That's a good point. We've been focusing a lot on the industry side of things, the destination managers, the hotels, the tour operators. But what about us, the people who actually visit these destinations? What role do we play in making coastal tourism more sustainable?
That's what we're going to explore in the next part of this deep dive.
Definitely.
We'll be back in a moment to unpack the role of the traveler in supporting sustainable coastal tourism. Stay tuned.
All right.
Welcome back to our deep dive into sustainable coastal tourism. Before the break, we were talking about, the big picture stuff, like the challenges facing coastal destinations and those ambitious goals set by the ocean panel. But now let's shift our focus a little bit to something a little more personal. What about our role as travelers? Can we actually make a difference in supporting sustainable tourism practices?
Absolutely. Our choices as travelers, our behaviors, they have a ripple effect on the places that we visit. It's kind of like that old saying, think globally, act locally. But in this case, it's more like think globally, travel responsibly. Oh, I like that. So where do we begin? The source talks about, making conscious choices when we book our trips, like choosing eco-friendly accommodations or tour operators that are sustainable.
Yeah, exactly. It's about going beyond just the price tag and the pretty pictures and actually digging a little deeper. Like, is the hotel using renewable energy? Do they have water conservation measures in place? Does the tour operator have a commitment to, minimizing their impact on the environment? These are all things that we can look for.
So it's like we have to become detectives almost.
Yeah.
Putting on our sustainability hats and doing some research before we book. But what about those online travel agencies? Because they often have the best deals.
Yeah.
But it's hard to tell if the hotels or the tours are truly sustainable.
That's a good point. Some travel agencies are starting to incorporate sustainability filters into their search options, so that can be helpful. And then there are also websites and organizations that are dedicated to rating and recommending eco-friendly travel options. A little bit of research can go a long way. Okay, so we've booked our eco-friendly hotel and our responsible whale watching tour. What about once we get there? The source mentions minimizing our waste and respecting local customs.
Yeah, for sure. It's about remembering that we're guests in someone else's home. Simple things like using reusable water bottles and shopping bags can make a big difference in reducing plastic waste and being mindful of our water and energy consumption even when we're on vacation. It all helps conserve resources.
What about respecting local customs? I've definitely been in situations where I wasn't sure about the appropriate attire or behavior.
It's always a good idea to do a little research beforehand, learn a few basic phrases in the local language, dress respectfully. Be mindful of cultural norms. It's about showing genuine interest and respect for the place that you're visiting.
This makes me think about a trip I took a few years ago to a small coastal village in Southeast Asia, and I was so excited to experience the local culture. But I realized that my presence, along with, a bunch of other tourists, was actually really impacting the daily lives of the people who live there. And it made me question whether my desire to experience their culture was actually contributing to its erosion.
Wow, that's a really insightful observation. And it speaks to this larger issue within the tourism industry. It's not just about minimizing our negative impacts, but also about considering whether our presence is truly beneficial to the local community.
Right, so how do we find that balance? How do we ensure that our travels are actually a force for good for both the environment and the people who live in these destinations?
That's the million-dollar question, and there's no easy answer. But I think it starts with asking ourselves some tough questions like, why are we traveling to this particular destination? What are we hoping to gain from this experience? And how can we ensure that our trip is benefiting the local community and the environment rather than harming them?
So it's about shifting from a mindset of consumption to a mindset of contribution. Instead of just, taking selfies and checking things off of our bucket list, it's about engaging with the destination on a deeper level, learning about its history and culture, supporting local businesses.
Exactly. And it might even involve, stepping outside our comfort zones a little bit. Maybe we choose to stay in a locally owned guest house instead of a big resort. Or we participate in a volunteer project that supports a local conservation effort. Or we simply strike up conversations with locals and learn about their perspectives.
So it's about being more than just tourists. It's about being travelers who are curious, respectful, and engaged. It's about leaving a positive footprint, both environmentally and socially.
I love that phrase, leaving a positive footprint.
Yeah.
It really captures the essence of what sustainable travel is all about.
Okay, so we've talked about booking responsibly, minimizing our waste, respecting local customs, and engaging with the destination on a deeper level. Are there any other ways that we can support sustainable coastal tourism as travelers?
Yeah, there are so many possibilities. For example, we could choose to travel during the off-season, which helps distribute tourism revenue more evenly throughout the year and reduces the pressure on destinations during peak season.
Oh, that's a great tip. And it often means better deals and fewer crowds. Win-win.
Exactly. And we can also be mindful of our transportation choices, like can we walk or bike or take public transportation instead of relying on taxis or rental cars? Can we choose a destination that's closer to home and reduce our carbon footprint from air travel?
All great points. And speaking of carbon footprint, what about carbon offsetting? Is that a legitimate way to mitigate the environmental impact of our travels?
Carbon offsetting is a complex issue. There's a lot of debate about its effectiveness, but the basic idea is that you can invest in projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions to kind of compensate for the emissions that are generated by your trip.
So for example, if I fly from New York to the Caribbean for a beach vacation, I could donate to a project that plants trees or invests in renewable energy.
Exactly. The idea is to neutralize your impact. Now, there are some criticisms of carbon offsetting. Some people argue that it allows people to continue polluting without actually changing their behavior, but it can be a helpful tool, especially when it's combined with other sustainable travel practices.
So it's not a magic bullet, but it's something to consider as part of a larger effort to reduce our environmental impact.
Absolutely. And remember, sustainability is a journey, not a destination. We don't have to be perfect eco-warriors overnight. Every small step we take, every conscious choice we make contributes to a more sustainable future for coastal tourism.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation. I'm starting to realize that sustainable tourism is about so much more than just choosing the right hotel or packing a reusable water bottle. It's about a fundamental shift in mindset, a commitment to being responsible and respectful travelers who are conscious of our impact on the world.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's about understanding that our travel choices have consequences, both positive and negative. And it's about embracing the opportunity to make those choices count, to create a more sustainable and equitable world, one trip at a time.
We'll be right back after a quick break. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring sustainable coastal tourism, and before the break we were talking about how travelers can actually make a difference.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing when you realize that even small actions can really contribute to positive change.
That's like we're all, part of this giant puzzle, and we each hold a piece that's essential for, creating that sustainable future for coastal tourism. So the source really focuses on the, the bigger picture stuff like destination management and industry practices. But it got me thinking, are there any, specific initiatives or examples of sustainable coastal tourism in action that would be interesting for our listeners to hear about?
Oh, absolutely. There are so many incredible projects happening all over the world. For example, in some coastal communities in the Pacific Islands, they're implementing this thing called community-based tourism.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
So it's all about empowering local communities to manage and benefit from tourism in their own way. So they set up these locally owned guest houses, offer cultural tours led by community members, and just make sure that the profits stay within the community.
So it's about shifting the control away from, big corporations and putting it back in the hands of the people who actually live there.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just economics, too. It's about preserving their culture, protecting their environment, and really having a say in how their home is shared with the world.
That's a really powerful example of how sustainable tourism can actually empower those communities and preserve that cultural heritage. Are there any other examples that come to mind?
Yeah, there's this really cool project in the Philippines that's focused on coral reef restoration. So they've created these underwater nurseries where they grow coral fragments and then transplant them back onto the damaged reefs.
Wow, so they're rebuilding those ecosystems that are so vital to both marine life and the tourism industry.
Exactly. And they even get tourists involved. You can actually go snorkeling or diving and help plant those coral fragments. It's a really amazing way to combine a vacation with, a meaningful conservation experience.
I love that. It's not just about seeing the beauty of a place, but it's about actually contributing to its protection.
Yeah, it's about traveling with a purpose.
These examples are so inspiring. It makes me feel hopeful that sustainable coastal tourism can become, the norm, not the exception.
Me too. It's definitely a vision that's within reach.
Yeah.
If we all work together.
The governments, businesses,
travelers.
So I think this deep dive has really highlighted that sustainable coastal tourism isn't about sacrificing our enjoyment. It's about enhancing it by ensuring that those places that we love to visit remain beautiful and vibrant and welcoming for generations to come.
Well said. It's about creating a win-win.
Thank you.
For everyone involved, tourists, local communities, and the environment.
We've covered so much in this deep dive. We've explored the challenges, facing these coastal destinations, the goals for a more sustainable future, and most importantly, I think the role we each play as travelers in making that vision a reality.
It's a journey we're all on together.
So the next time you're dreaming of a coastal getaway, remember what we talked about today. Do your research, make conscious choices, and travel with a purpose. Every step you take towards sustainable travel makes a difference.
Keep exploring. There's a whole world out there waiting to be discovered. And with just a little bit of effort, we can all ensure that it stays that way.